Business can no longer be a spectator in socioeconomic challenges of society. Trying times of any society requires every sector to pull its weight behind the project. These are the words of Chancellor of the University of the Free State, Bonang Mohale. He says there has always been a need for business not to only focus on profits, but help the vulnerable. South Africa is currently facing great societal challenges. Some have always been there, but have now worsened by the deadly COVID-19 pandemic. The Chancellor of the University of the Free State, Bonang Mohale, joins us now to have this conversation and more. Professor Mohale, it's good to have you with us tonight.
An absolute privilege, my brother, and thank you for having me.
You're saying in a time such as this, we need to move beyond just the staid maxim that corporations should act to maximize shareholder value. What should be the focus of corporations in a time of great societal need, but also pending danger that is taking lives?
In fact, in the article, I talk about two interrelated and intertwined concepts. The first is this notion of shared value. The second is ESG as an acronym for the environment, society, and governance. And starting from the premise that says one of the things that are keeping boards awake at night these days is to ensure that corporate decision making is consistent not only with the whims of the shareholders, but a much broader stakeholder community, the society in which it's located, the community from which it is based. I go on to articulate in the 21st century that surely the role of business must be, amongst others, number one, to survive, because if you can survive this pandemic, you are already profitable. And you survive, of course, by preserving cash, by strengthening your balance sheet. The second concept, that I introduced is this notion of shared value, to say, surely not only for short-term sustainability, but long-term resilience, companies are better off ensuring that they partner with all the stakeholders. Thirdly, I'm saying you need to hold the executives to the decisions that they make. I then move on to say, but business must do no harm. Our employees have a right to leave home from their significant others and key relationships and go back wholesome and complete.
Yeah.
But that sounds almost passive.
Yeah.
I then go on to say, but the real hard work is to ensure that actually the world is a better place. Yeah. And that is the job of business. Because you see, business must continue to do well by doing good.
Yeah.
Business cannot continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty, because when business does well, society generally does well. Lastly, I then say, but business also needs to make sure that it engenders this notion of employee engagement, and it concerns itself with education, because you are growing your own timber, not in and of itself, but when you do so, you are actually creating markets of the future, not just creating jobs for its own sake. Back to you, sir.
Now, one would say what Professor Mohale is talking about in an ideal world sounds really great, or maybe as a paper, as a dissertation, sounds really fantastic. But what we have seen during COVID-19 in practice is something completely different. And one would say, even take it further to say there is that trust deficit. People in society do not trust corporations, do not trust corporate to act in a responsible way. For example, you've got UIF that has been issued as relief that is supposed to go to the employees. The employer has kept a large chunk of that money in some instances during lockdown level 5. Right now, we're talking about vaccines and the incorporation of the private sector in the procurement of those vaccines. And many are saying, well, we don't trust the private sector to actually have the greater good of society at heart. In fact, all they'll be interested in is profits. And therefore, huge parts of South Africa, rural South Africa, will be left behind because they're not going to get the benefit of those vaccines. What do you say?
So you're absolutely correct in terms of perception. And the reality is something else. Remember, I didn't write an academic paper. I'm a business person myself. I have been running 5 multinationals from the 17th of April, 1996, when I was MD of the world's biggest and oldest elevator company, Otis. So I wasn't really talking about a theoretical thing. But you're absolutely correct, because when you look at the example of Steinhoff, of Tongaat Hewlett, amongst others, they don't inspire confidence, absolutely. But also we have not to be selective in our judgment of business. One, it is business that paid the first tranche of vaccines. Government missed its own deadline of the 15th of December. Towards the end of that month, business paid the second tranche to make sure that the slightly less than 300 million rand that's required to get us into the COVAX program, that all of it actually is paid with by business, to ensure that, again, business does 3 things. Initially, one is to ensure that we become a trusted advisor. Secondly, that we are a partner of choice. That thirdly, we make this ANC-led government a capable state, because it's manifestly in the interest of business to ensure that it deals with a capable state. Let me talk a little bit about the vaccine. You see, the vaccine, it's not a panacea, silver bullet that all of us think we get it tomorrow and then the pandemic is gone. Remember, the Spanish flu lasted 2 years, from February of 1919 to April of 1920, and it came in 4 successive waves. So in this country, the president has set us a target of 67% herd immunity. That's 40 million people. That's 100,000 people a day. There's no way that government will be able to do this on its own. They will have to do to business, because business has trucks, business does logistics better than anybody else, and in fact, it has the abilities and capabilities. The cost to South Africans, depending on the type of vaccine we choose, because there are 4 of them that have already been approved by major markets out of the 284 that are already in development. Depending on the foreign exchange, on the dosage, whether it's single or double dose, whether it's imported or manufactured locally, etc. The cost could be anything from 2 billion to 18 billion South African rands. When one considers that 16.4% of South Africans are on medical aid, you then say, actually, the maximum liability to the medical schemes is 7 billion, which represents about 2% of all premiums. So Pfizer has given us 1, Johnson & Johnson has given us another, AstraZeneca the 3rd, and indeed Moderna the last one. But I think what is really key about the role of business in these times is to say, look, business knows how to deliver this thing called project management. Mega projects on time, on budget, and in full. No government in the world can do that better than business. It's certainly not the South African government, where today, as we're speaking, our debt is 3 trillion. Our borrowing is at a rate of 2.1 billion a day. Our debt to GDP ratio is 93%. But when you include our guarantees to SOEs and SOCs, this goes up to 110%. It's not the percentage in and of itself, it's our ability to pay. At the moment, clearly we don't have the money even to save lives.
Yeah.
So our debt servicing costs are now 20 billion. My brother, back to you.
Now, you speak of concepts like common humanity. You speak of compelling vision. And you're saying this hinges on leadership, which is the courage to shape one's sense of character and make a difference. How do we get to that level of leadership?
You see, the 21st century is great and magnificent, not because of technology, but because of this expanding concept of what it means to be human. Businesses need to assume a human tone, a human heart, a human posture, human behavior. Business must concern itself with the notions of fairness, of equality, of egalitarianness, but also of peace. Because until and unless you have those conditions, it becomes impossible for you to do business and indeed be profitable. South African breweries, AB InBev or Anheuser-Busch is a good example where since the lockdown, probably 310 days now of lockdown, they are unable to sell their products and they are now retrenching. I think what business needs to ask itself, what more can we do? Because as business, we then say, really our role is to help our people to better be able to see around the corners so that they can always ask the question, so what else is missing? So in a pandemic, when everybody else is panicking and government is giving truly the most amazing leadership, business needs to be thinking 5 years down the line, not opposing what government is doing. Business needs to be saying, how can we bring our skills to the fore to make sure that we survive this, because it's manifestly in our own interest to ensure that when we can survive this, we are already profitable.
What is this notable evolution and implementation of environment, society, and governance concept that you have picked up in the financial sector? What are they doing and what are the benefits?
So you see, the biggest private equity in the world, BlackRock, 3 years ago said, we are no longer going to invest in companies that are polluting the environment. We are not going to invest in hydrocarbons. But of course, we'll double our investment in sustainable energy, in gas, in photovoltaic, in solar, in hydro, and indeed in wind. They are looking at ESG and more sustainable ways of doing business. They are saying, in fact, man did not stop the Stone Age because man ran out of stone, but because man found better, more effective and efficient ways of doing things. So we know that 2 of the single source polluters in the world are found in South Africa, in Eskom and indeed in Sasol, especially around Sasolburg, the Middelburg area. It's a good example. So business then says, imagine when the banks like Nedbank did now, Standard Bank and indeed RMB says we're going to offer green bonds because they can see that there's almost 18 trillion of capital that is looking for a home. And South Africa is best positioned because our interest rates are higher than in the US of A and indeed in Europe. Secondly, we are Africa's most complex and yet diversified market, even though we're only number 2 in terms of GDP after Nigeria. But by and large, Nigeria is a single commodity market. So they are saying if we play our cards right, we can get foreign direct investment into South Africa because 3 of the biggest rivers in the world are actually found here. In fact, the sun here shines 228 days in a year. Yeah. In Germany, maybe 3 months. That's no more than 90 days. And yet the World Authority on Solar Energy is Germany, not Africa. Right. And here we are talking about 1.3 billion people, 55 countries that speak 2,000 languages, with 30.3 square kilometers of pristine coastline. And every mineral that the world needs in this continent is found as either number 1 or number 2, my brother.
What is the starting point then for ESG?
I think the starting point is really to be very deliberate and purposeful in our capital allocation. Let me give you an example. For many decades, South African companies, asset managers, insurance companies have been taking money that belongs to Black people and building shopping malls. Initially, the Sandton City Square in the richest square mile in the continent, and then all the other suburbs. Only of late did they wake up and erroneously started building malls in townships. And they did that not by partnering with local business, knowing that they were going to kill the businesses of Ntate Maponya, of E.T. Chabalala. and indeed of Dr. Sam Mutswenyane. Why our government allowed them to do that, it's really beyond us. So these businesses realize that, if we are purposeful, deliberate, and conscious in the way we use and we allocate our capital, actually we can improve the quality of lives of the majority of our people. The study that was just done in 2020 about what keeps South Africans awake at night, in an environment where the most searched for word on the net is unprecedented. South Africans put COVID at number 5. Number 1 is jobs, number 2 is transformation, and number 3 is growth. Because they've realized that for them, in fact, the economic devastation kills more people than the virus itself. It has always been about both these things, not either or. It was about saving lives and the preservation of livelihoods. Yeah. It's not either or, but both end together at the same time, simultaneously, concurrently, and in parallel. Over to you, Sam.
What I want to find out from you, how well we are using technology in all this endeavor to be sustainable.
You see, technology has enabled us to do the most amazing, wonderful good things. So in South Africa, unfortunately, when the pandemic found us, we were already prostate, face down, and absolutely finished, because we had just emerged from the Moody's downgrading us to below investment grade or junk, joining the other two. But also we just came out of a technical recession. But we're just surviving the 9 wasted years of state capture. Stats SA tells us that only 10.4% of households have direct access to the internet. But what technology has allowed us is that during this lockdown that started for us on the 26th of March, announced by the president on the 23rd, giving us 4 days to be prepared. 4 days. They released 5G spectrum, which is owned by government. And with that, we're able to help the 26 public universities to make sure that, at least in the universities themselves, that they can give a lot of content and a lot of access for free. It allowed the majority of us companies, there's probably less than 400 that are listed on the JSE, more than 1.6 million when include SMEs, that those people could work from home, that they could do social distancing, and they can do self-quarantine when it is absolutely necessary. And of course, it has allowed us to continue to have some modicum of activity using this technology. Today, all of us, through our cell phones, through our iPads, and indeed laptops, were indeed able to transact. When you look at the figures in April, after the lockdown in March, on average, we used to sell, one company, 500 cars a month. The month of April, we sold only 1 car. But after the second half, because we have learned how to use technology, you can see the recovery is very steep, upwards and forwards, not to pre-COVID levels yet, but we have halted the anticipated retrenchments. A lot of those companies are actually now profitable. Some of them were essential services before we got onto an enhanced alert level number 3, had actually started having up to 60% of their employees regularly coming to the office on a rotational basis.
Right, Dr. Mohale, I'm going to have to leave it there because of time, but I do appreciate you coming through today. The Chancellor of the University of the Free State there, Professor Bonang Mohale. We continue next.